Thanks very much, Lyndon. Appreciate the welcome. And again, apologies, I can't be joining you all in person, but unfortunately, COVID made that decision for me. So still stuck on the East Coast. In line with your theme of today's event, I wanted to touch on what I saw as the key topics that are going to impact the barley markets and the barley industry as we head forward towards 2030 and beyond. So if I can, nope, that doesn't want to move. Bear with me. There we go. So if we look through a few of these topics, we'll have a bit of a snapshot of the global situation, the domestic situation, and then we'll move into the conversations around sustainability, traceability, industry leadership and governance, market access, and the potential growth of domestic manufacturing. As growers, I think these topics are all relevant to you guys and how the industry is going to move forward and the impacts it's going to have. The global situation. If I take that, oops, sorry. If we look at this, this is a chart we put together at AEGIC in our Barley 2030 report, and it's basically a comparison of two different periods. So 2000 to 2004. And then 2015 to 2019, and it just did a comparison between those two periods on what's happening in the global grain sort of environment. And we can see there when we look at area harvested for barley, it's actually dropped 11.5% globally in area harvested. So between those two periods, so that's a significant downwards trend. By comparison, other total grains and oilseeds have risen by 13% in that time. Wheat stayed relatively flat around that 2.9%. And the big move has been in corn, where area harvested jumped up around that 37% globally. So barley's really got some challenges, and it looks like a trend that's continuing in our view. So in a global context, the growers basically turning their back a bit on growing barley and preferring to go for these other crops. You could argue that that's potentially supportive of price, but I think ultimately, if less and less barley is being grown globally, then end users tend to leave it out of their ration management and look for alternatives and substitutes. So it's a bit of a risk for barley there. The alternative being that it's solely reliant on the barley malt and brewing industries, which is not a bad thing, but it would be better to have a range of options to go to. So not a good story on the global front for barley looking at that. If we come back to the domestic market here in Australia, it's a bit of a different story. We see winter crop rotation is largely consistent. So West Australia, I would have it somewhere around 1.5 million hectares sown to barley each year. And Australia-wide, it's more like 4 million hectares sown to barley each year. And then it comes down to the seasonal conditions, which drive that production ultimately. And as we've seen over the last couple of years, those conditions have been favourable, and we've had big production in crops. Don't need to tell you guys this, but yield remains largely the king for growers, and is sought after. So we're seeing a lot of research in that area, hyper yielding varieties, that kind of thing, to try and build that profile and competitiveness of barley in the scheme of things here. And I've got there finally the malt to feed price spread and what influences that. So really to maintain and increase that malt spread over feed barley, we really need to maintain some export malt barley markets, and not just be reliant solely on the domestic market to drive that spread. When we've got demand from overseas markets for our malt barley, that's where that spread comes into play a bit more and puts a bit more pressure on that. Otherwise, you know, in obviously challenging years from a production point of view is the other way to look at that as well. So the domestic situation looks largely consistent, and no huge changes there any given year. Then we move on to the sustainability topic. Look, this is a big topic. I think it's going to be a continuing one again as we move towards 2030 and beyond. And it's largely driven by the end users and their CSR, or corporate social responsibility protocols, and that's driving demand down the supply chain as the end users and want to show their credentials to the market that they're doing the right thing by the environment. In order to do that, they are pushing that requirement down ultimately to growers to provide that information and provide that compliance in terms of sustainability. I've got the example there of Heineken sustainability and responsibility document off their website. But a lot of the end users, whether it be in feed rations or brewing and food products, a lot of them are looking for this sustainability angle now as well. Following that, I've also got the CO2 debate continuing. We've heard a lot about it already. It's not going to go away. Again, I've used a Heineken example there. So they're looking for a carbon neutral production by 2030 and their full value chain to be carbon neutral by 2040. So that's some really ambitious targets. And the big question here is about whether we call it CO2 reduction or CO2 abatement. It's how to measure that and how ultimately the market can price that in some way. In that Heineken example, we've seen that they're obviously a global end user of making beer in Europe and various parts of the world. The model they use to measure their CO2 abatement in Europe, for instance, doesn't give a comparable result when you use data from an Australian production environment. So already there's, you know, a lot of discussion and reconciliation to have there on how the industry deals with that, or how we clean up that question around CO2 going forward. And then finally there, I've got the sustainability programs such as ISCC and Sustainable Grain Australia. I think these programs are going to continue to grow. And I think largely the market will be based on accredited barley as the base price, and then apply discounts for non-accredited barley going forward, similar to what's happened with the canola markets. But again, as growers, I think you know, that is going to impact your business, and it's important to take that into consideration on where you sit with that and how that works for your business. Because again, although there's opportunity to supply into specific markets with that, there's administration work and compliance to tick off on at a farm level to meet those programs as well. Continuing on in a similar vein is the traceability discussion. Essentially, processors just want to get as close to the grower as possible, and to do that, they're running their own procurement programs direct to growers, which isn't a bad thing. I'm using the example there of Asahi Beverages over on the East Coast, and they now run programs to procure a lot of their malt barley requirements direct with growers. So they'll do the pricing, they'll do the contracts, and then they will novate those contracts to a malt house in order for them to execute those contracts and produce the malt. So it adds an element of complexity to that supply chain, where previously the malt house would buy the barley from the growers, make the malt, sell it to the breweries. Now the brewers control that pricing mechanism a lot more, not 100%, but a lot more. And we're seeing that continual evolution of trying to get as close to the grower as possible. From a grower perspective, there is opportunity there to maybe leverage some price along those programs, but at the same time comes that additional responsibility and additional administration and record keeping. So, you know, crop diaries, chemical applications, storage movements, and all those type of aspects. More and more compliance in that area to meet the requirements of those programs. But if you can get some extra dollars for it, it's possibly worthwhile. I've used the domestic market as an example there, but again, I think now and going forward, export markets to some level also want to see a level of traceability in the grain and barley they're buying from Australia, whether that's back to a bulk handler site or something similar to that. Next topic I had was the industry leadership and governance. I think as we move forward, there'll be some consolidation of grower representative groups. Maybe some of the smaller groups just consolidate into some of the larger ones to just streamline a bit of that process and allow the industry to prioritise some of the big topics that need to be addressed sooner rather than later, rather than having a diverse range of topics, just focusing on a few of the bigger ticket items. And likewise, I see that happening in the industry as a larger group. So the consolidation of some of the individual organisations coming under one banner, and obviously that's Grains Australia in this current environment, and bringing that strong emphasis on united industry under one banner and one message. As that evolves, you get, you know, one umbrella organisation driving the research, the classification, and the industry direction, with a common goal. QA and integrity on the supply chain are also addressed, and MRL management. So a lot of those broad industry big ticket items get the industry perspective attention and a clear message to markets on where the industry is at and where it's going to, and who to contact in the event it needs to something needs to happen. Once that's established, then, you know, the trade can do their thing more readily in terms of focusing on trading and selling the grain. Market access, a huge topic, obviously, particularly for you guys in Western Australia, which is an export-focused state. It's imperative to maintain market access with your reliance on bulk exports and container exports out of WA across all commodities, but particularly barley. So the market access question is really about positioning Australian barley to access a diverse range of markets and not just be limited to one or two. Then where the barley actually flows to, that comes down to commercial returns, and the trade can largely manage that. But it's more about industry having all those gates open so that the barley can flow to a range of markets at the end of the day. When we've got that, we mitigate the supply chain, the political and the market risk. And we can continue to promote the Australian barley varieties, which do suit a range of markets. So we've got a really good basket of varieties, and the industry investment and evolution in new varieties continues to suit a range of applications and markets. So we're in a really good spot to to continue to broaden our market ranges. We do know that Australian growers are more exposed to risk than their counterparts overseas. So this is a really important aspect from an industry-wide point of view, to make sure we're providing all options for our grain to keep flowing out. On the right-hand side there, I've just got a snippet from our Barley 2030 report, which just shows some of the opportunities for Australian barley towards 2030. So you can see some of the old names are there, the established markets, but along with that, we've got some new opportunities which we need to consolidate and maintain, such as South America and India, a few places like that. Finally, I've got the growth of domestic manufacturing. So we're first on the list there is in this space is the health and nutrition foods manufacturing. So we're seeing a big trend in the market towards healthy living and combating lifestyle diseases such as heart issues and diabetes, etc. So barley has really good nutritional credentials. It's high in soluble fiber, vitamins, trace elements, and it can be applied to a range of products from flour, pearl, flakes, and malt. So it's really quite versatile and suits a lot of those lifestyle trends. So I think that's an area where barley can perhaps make some more headway into and open up a few doors there going forward. In that space, we've recently seen the development out of CSIRO of the Barley Max variety, which is a barley variety with increased vitamin E levels, as well as even more fibre in it. Now, it's grown on a relatively small scale, but it is sold to some of the large bakeries who are making probiotic type products with that to sell into this healthy living segment of the market with great success. So I think there's real potential there. And then on top of that, I've also got the potential investment in domestic malt capacity. We see the brewing industry in Asia, Southeast Asia, continuing to roll along, growing marginally, but they continue to look for further demand of malt from Australia. So I think there's some potential there to invest in domestic malt capacity further and still meet in order to service that ongoing Asian malt demand. And then finally, I've got there the craft brewing and distilling markets. They offer high value market. If you're a grower in a area that can service some of these craft brewing and distilling markets, they are small volume, small scale, but they can be opportunities for high value markets. And they continue to hang around as a supported segment of the Australian brewing landscape. So well worth having a look at as a grower as well. Excuse me. So largely it from me, but if I can just leave you with these key messages. The supply chain integrity, it is going to require compliance, particularly around that, excuse me, traceability and sustainability. And that's largely going to come back to growers to supply that. The markets we have, they may be more diverse as we move forward, but they will be available. And Australian barley will continue to buy demand in export and domestic markets. End users, they do want to promote their CSIR credentials. They don't always want to pay for it, but if you're a supplier who can meet those credentials, then it keeps you at the table as a key supplier going forward as well. Industry stewardship for clear and consistent communication and the consolidation of a few of those organisations into one banner within the industry. And then finally, the health conscious markets continue to drive innovation and I think provide some real opportunity for barley going forward into 2030 and beyond. That's largely it from me. I would encourage you to have a look at the Grain and Legume Nutrition Council website. There's some great work there on some of those health food aspects, and including barley. And also, as I mentioned a few times, the Barley 2030 report is on our AEGIC website, if that's of interest, to get some further details on that. That is it from me. I think we've got question time now, if that's up there.
All right. Thanks, Jack. Have we got any questions from the floor or out in the wider web? I'll take that as a no. So we've let you off, Jack. You can rest your voice and hopefully get better soon. So can you all put your hands together for Jack, please?
Thank you.